Hello, everybody. I'm Yolie Medina. I'm a civil attorney, and I've been following this Kohberger case, Bryan Kohberger, also known as the Idaho 4 case. And wow, if you don't know about this is a case where Bryan Kohberger is alleged to have committed the unalivings of 4 students at a home near or close to the campus of the Idaho State University. Or the University of Idaho. Sorry. Anyway, this case is very intriguing, and a lot of paperwork has been dropped, and there are motions in limine, and there are oppositions to motions in limine. And these motions are to either exclude evidence, certain evidence, or to get a ruling ahead of time to allow this evidence to come in. And boy, is there a lot. So there's going to be a lot of explanations needed to prove this case against Bryan Kohberger. Okay, so first of all, the vehicle that Bryan Kohberger was driving, he was driving a white Elantra, actually that was the car that he owned at the time of the unalivings, which was November 13th, 2022. So he had a white Elantra. And so there's various pictures of the white car, and that's all I can call it, is a white car. Because in the exhibits attached to these motions, there's various black and white photos of a white car. And from the very beginning, we've never had a license plate identified that traced back to Bryan Kohberger, his vehicle. It's always been this white car, white Hyundai Elantra. In fact, at first it started with the Sentra, then it went to a certain year of an Elantra, then it moved to a broader year of an Elantra. And if you look at white cars, I don't know. I don't know how a jury is going to be able to determine if his car was in the area or near the house, much less parked near the house. And it's just beyond me, because there's going to be a lot of elderly people on this jury, and they're going to have to be looking at these pictures. And so what they're going to have to do is they're going to have to rely on experts, on vehicle identification experts. So they're going to have to rely on experts, and there's going to be experts on both sides. So the jury's going to have to either believe one expert over the other, and looking at the pictures, they're going to have to decide whether or not that is the Elantra that Bryan Kohberger owned. Now, I can't even tell, and I have bad eyes, dry eyes. I'm trying to look, and I can't tell. I mean, sometimes, it even looks like a Chrysler to me sometimes. Other times it looks like it could be like a Ford Fusion or something. I mean, I have no idea. So I don't know. The jury's just going to have to rely on experts and determine the credibility of each expert along with the pictures. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the knife sheath that was left at the scene. The sheath is a removable object. So what's going to happen is that the jury is going to have to decide who to believe in terms of the DNA found on the knife sheath. Okay, so you're going to have experts on both sides, and the jury is going to have to look at both experts and look at what they're saying and basically choose who's the most credible. But when it comes to DNA, it's so complicated. I mean, it's just crazy. And then we have the fact that both parties, the defense and the prosecution, agreed to not introduce the investigative genetic genealogy that was used by the FBI to identify Bryan Kohberger. Now, I don't know how they're going to do this, but Brett Payne, the lead officer, said that the first time Bryan Kohberger's name came into his mind or came into his orbit was on December 19th, and that was through the FBI. Now, he says that the FBI did not tell him that through investigative genetic genealogy, they pinpointed Bryan Kohberger as a possible suspect. So again, we're going to have to rely on experts, and we're going to have to, I don't know how the prosecution is going to explain that they came to Bryan Kohberger based on a tip by the FBI, because that's what they're proposing, that they just say it was a tip from the FBI. And the defense has said, okay, sure, we'll agree to that. But you can't lie. You can't lie how you got to Kohberger. So I don't know how they're going to identify, how they're going to present that. How do you present that? The FBI told you to look at Bryan Kohberger, but they didn't tell you why. I mean, they just said, look at him. I mean, that's odd. That's odd. It's going to cause a lot of questions. Okay, so then the next thing is proving that, not to mention the car has to be proved by experts that it was Bryan Kohberger's car, but his cell phone was pinging to the cell tower that also services the area of the home where the students were unalived. So you have that, and I believe Cy Ray is an expert who's going to come in and talk about the cell tower issue and how the phone could ping to a certain cell tower yet be far away from the house. And I don't even understand all of the scientific stuff regarding the cell phone, but that's another expert. And the prosecution is going to have their expert. So the jury's going to have to look and decide who to believe, prosecution or defense expert regarding this cell tower. That's another, where his phone was near the cell tower. Okay. Then we have this 911 call by the roommate, Dylan Mortensen or Bethany Funk, one of them called. And there's an 8-hour delay from the time that a law enforcement says that the unalivings occurred to the time they called 911. So now we learn through these motions that there was a text exchange going on between the roommates, and it was going on from 2 a.m. onward until the time they called 911. They were calling their parents like early on in the morning. I mean, that has to be explained other than what's in the text, because the text just say, you know, DM, one of the roommates texted BF, one of the roommates, surviving roommates, and there's no context there. It just says that these texts were occurring. And so the defense wants to exclude the transcript of the 911 call because the prosecution is trying to get it in under excited utterance and present sense impression. Well, there's a problem because there was a lot going on before the 911 call was made. And in the 911 call, the audio, one of the roommates is saying, can I just tell you what happened? There was a man that came in at 4 a.m. and the 911 operator cuts her off and says, I need to know if somebody needs help now. And so there's a lot of explaining as to what went on there and why were they calling their parents and what were they advised to do. And I had done a previous video because the way it was called in, and before these elaborate texts came, all the texts coming from the roommates from 2 o'clock onward. And I made a video and I talked about how Idaho University has a policy where they can call 911, report it as an unconscious person, possibly due to drugs or alcohol, and the person calling 911 would not get in trouble for reporting that, even if they too were intoxicated. And we know from Dylan Mortensen's transcript of the statements she gave to various officers that she admitted she was drunk. And I did a video on that saying that she wasn't a reliable witness because she was drunk and tired, and she herself admitted that she was drunk. She didn't know what was going on. All right, then you have a motion by the defense to strike the death penalty because Bryan Kohberger is on the spectrum, autism spectrum, and he has OCD and he has some kind of motor coordination diagnosis that his motor coordination is damaged and he would not have been able to do this crime. So that requires expert testimony, and that this death penalty motion was filed after the deadline for the motions to strike the death penalty. So I assume that it was through his mitigation experts who tested him and learned that he had this. But there's also information that Bryan Kohberger was a runner. There's pictures of him doing push-ups. He used to do kickboxing. And so that kind of flies in the face of this motor coordination thing. So, and again, an expert is going to have to talk about this. And so there's probably going to be another expert for the prosecution, and the jury's going to have to decide between the two experts. Okay, then there was unknown DNA found on the handrail of the house, going from the second floor to the first floor, and it was blood, which is stronger than skin cells that were found on the button snap of the knife sheath. There was also unknown DNA on a glove outside the house. Now, those two unknown DNAs were not tested. They were not put through the rigmarole that the skin cells were put through, meaning putting it through CODIS, sending it to an outside lab, trying to do this investigative genetic genealogy. Those two unknown DNA samples were not tested. And the reason given is an explanation. And so Brett Payne gives an explanation in one of these hearings, which he's probably going to have to give at trial. He's going to have to explain why he didn't do it. And that's because he erroneously thought a certain thing that he couldn't put it into CODIS when some DNA has already been put in CODIS, which doesn't make any sense. So he's going to have to explain that, and then there's going to be experts talking about that. And then we have the DNA, unknown DNA found under Maddie Mogan, one of the victims' fingernails. And again, that's subject to expert testimony that it was inconclusive. Now, the defense has said they've done testing, and it shows that it excludes Bryan Kohberger from being one of the contributors of the DNA found under the fingernail of Maddie's right hand. So then we have no video of Bryan Kohberger entering into the house with his little backpack with the vacuum, because one of the witnesses said at some point she thought she saw someone that had a vacuum. This masked man with his eyes showing and bushy eyebrows, and she thought he had a vacuum. So now I'm waiting for an expert to come in to talk about the bushy eyebrows and talk about how the bushy eyebrows are Bryan's. And then what came out also was a selfie of Bryan allegedly taken the morning of the unalivings. It was around 10:30 in the morning. So it's a selfie of Bryan, and he's giving a thumbs up. And, being that he left the sheath, and the state's theory is that he went back early that morning to find the sheath and came back to his house and then took this selfie. I mean, if he really thought that the sheath was missing, why would he be taking a selfie with a thumbs up? I mean, he does have bushy eyebrows in that selfie for sure. He also looks malnourished, and he looks very thin. So I don't know. This case is just riddled with evidence that you need someone else to explain. And if there is a video out there of Bryan Kohberger going into the house, or somebody who at least looks like Bryan Kohberger getting out of a white car, going into the house with his little kit with a vacuum and all, then please show it. This is crazy. This case is going to require, it's like expert driven, and microscopically driven, because you can't see it. You can't see the evidence without having an expert explain it. You see the knife sheath, but you can't see the DNA on there. Oh, and then the prosecution also has some information that Bryan purchased a K-bar knife sheath, and a sharpener back in March of 2022. Keep in mind, these unalivings happened in November of 2022, in November 13th, 2022. And then they say they have click information. I don't even know what it's called, but click activity that shows that Bryan was searching for another K-bar knife. And the assumption is that, well, he's searching for it because he used it in the unalivings. The only problem with that is that they give a date range of November 1st to November 22nd that he was searching. Well, if that's the date range, then anything before November 13th, why would he be searching for a knife sheath before the unalivings? And then people are like, well, maybe he knew he was going to use it, and he knew he was going to have to destroy it after the crimes. And it's just, just show us a receipt for the knife purchase, the knife, the sheath, and the sharpener, because apparently he bought a sharpener. And the prosecution gives some information about witnesses testifying and corroborating this Amazon account. Okay, just show us a receipt. I'm sure they have access to the receipt. It's just this, and I'm glad that this judge is making things more open and giving more information, but there's still a lot of stuff we don't know, a lot of evidence that we don't know. And so for those of us who are following this case, it's just madness.